The Jewish people were not people of the sea. Except for their fishermen, the Israelites basically didn't have much to do with boats. They just weren't people of the water. Now, their neighbors, the Philistines, they were quite adept in boats. In fact, just as kind of a random fact that I thought was interesting when I learned it, historians believe that some of the earliest pirates in recorded history were Philistines, which I think just makes the story of David and Goliath seem way more interesting if David is fighting like a 9 foot tall pirate. Arr! Anyway, I thought it was funny. But for the people of God, the sea represented a place that was frightening and scary. N.T. Wright suggests that the sea represented a place where evil resided, something that threatened to destroy God's creation. We get a little bit of a sense of this if we read in Daniel chapter 7, where these great monsters come up out of the sea. My point in sharing this with you is that when the disciples are going over to the other side, they feel like they're crossing over enemy ground. The sea is not where good Jewish guys are going to hang out, like maybe on the edges where they're fishing, but to go over the Sea of Galilee and even more to leave their home turf in Galilee to go to the other side. This phrase, the other side, is a bit of a technical term, which refers to more than just geography and going to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Going to the other side refers to the Decapolis, a group of 10 cities that were founded by a group of Greek settler soldiers who had come to this area during the reign of Alexander the Great about 300 years before Jesus. Now, while there is evidence of Jewish communities located within the Decapolis, it seems clear that this area was considered pagan by most Jews who were devoted to God. If we just look at the archaeology, we see pagan temples, idols. There's a lot of pig bones that we find in the Decapolis area that we don't find in Galilee. This is a pagan area that most Jews who were devoted to God simply wouldn't go, which is why it's so interesting that Jesus says, let's go over to the other side. Why would a holy Jewish rabbi like Jesus go to a city like the Gerasenes, which is mentioned in Mark 5 and is one of the cities of the Decapolis? Good Jews didn't go to the Decapolis because that's where the pagan temples were. That's where the Roman power base was located. Now, I mention these details because you need to understand the context for the disciples being told by Jesus, let's go over to the other side. They would have already been feeling uneasy when the journey started. They would have already been feeling confused. Why? Why are we going? And then when the storm comes up on the sea, this had to have been very symbolic in their minds. This was a battle between good and evil, between the God of Israel and the evil demonic forces of the sea. And yet in the midst of this big, big battle, Jesus is asleep. You have to picture this in your mind. The disciples think they're going to die in the midst of this strange mission to go over to the other side. And here is Jesus, their rabbi, sleeping. They are upset. They're afraid. In verse 38, they say, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Then Jesus wakes up and he speaks to the wind and the waves and he says, "Quiet, be still." Here he's using language that mirrors what he said to the unclean spirit in Mark chapter 1. The King James version of this chapter translates Jesus' words, "Peace, be still." This is a demonstration of Jesus' power, and it amazes the disciples that even the wind and the waves obey Jesus. He's out on enemy turf. He's out in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, but Jesus has authority wherever he goes. Now, I don't know what you're facing in your life right now, but perhaps you might feel like Jesus has fallen asleep and he isn't particularly concerned about your situation. You might be asking him, "Teacher, don't you care if I drown?" But you should know, Jesus does care. I want you to know that Jesus has authority and power. Just like the disciples, you might be afraid that things have gotten out of control, but don't forget that we follow a rabbi who possesses authority. We follow the one who can speak to the wind and the waves and simply say, "Peace, be still."